where are we in Europe now, and how do we see from the Italian perspective the European situation at present? We think that the economic and financial crisis we are facing since 2008 in its different form is indeed a very serious one. I really hope that the capacity David has to put history in the right perspective from the future and from the past looking into the future will allow this crisis to be a very small line in a chapter. However, economic crises have shown in the past that they can bring very serious consequences in Europe and then time to time also into the world. If we look back at the crisis of 1929, of course, we consider it in its own characteristic, but also because of what happens next in Europe, in certain countries of Europe, and then to the world. So let's take this situation very, very seriously as it merits. And we think that what the European Union is doing is quite an interesting way to face the crisis. And we think that this European action is based on two pillars that we consider to be quite interconnected. The first one is, of course, the fiscal discipline, which is now concretely into the Fiscal Compact treaty, going to be signed in a few days here in Brussels. So fiscal discipline is, of course, the basis. Fiscal rigor is absolutely necessary to give the necessary guarantees to markets, to investors, and to restore a wealthy situation in Europe, both in the private and in the sovereign sector. But what we as a country, as Italian government, we have always believed is that this is not in itself enough. It is a cornerstone of the overall strategy, but is not enough. It's not enough both from an economic point of view, because we need also to think to something more forward-looking, like growth. And not only growth, is growth/employment. Growth is important if as a consequence of economic growth, then you have more job opportunity and therefore an increase in the employment rate. And then the other element is for our people, for our citizens, for all of us. We need to look at the future with a greater hope. Rigor and discipline are important messages, notably when rigor and discipline were not necessarily all the time there, but we need to look forward through a positive message, and the positive message can only be connected with opportunities, growth opportunities, opportunities for firms, opportunities for all people, opportunities for employment. So the two pillars are, in our view, very much interconnected. And this is the reason why, since December, and please do not forget that our government took office only on the 16th of November last year. So since December, we start in our different contact at European level, and we had a serial of important contact at European level, both at the level of the Prime Minister, of the different ministers. Myself, I went quite a lot around in different capitals, and we start bringing forward the idea, which was, by the way, very much welcome and never denied, that growth and employment were a necessary complement to the rigor strategy which was pursued through the Fiscal Compact. Furthermore, we had, to be quite frank, at the very beginning of the discussion around a new treaty on fiscal discipline, we were just a bit reluctant because we thought that if it was possible to carry on that exercise in a 27 dimension, which is the one proper for the European Union, it would have been ideal. However, we were ready to accept a lower dimension if certain countries were not ready to agree on the fiscal compact agreement, as we know it was and it is the case. However, the growth employment agenda, in our view, is and must be an exercise at 27, because the kind of policies we can develop at European level are typical European Union policies, and therefore has to be carried on and approved through the classical European, or what we call at a given time, community methodology, involving all European institutions and involving all the democratic mechanism of the European Union. So it was also a way, working around growth and employment, to recompact Europe in its correct 27-member, nearly 28 member dimension. So these are the background element of our ideas and approach to the overall crisis, both from the point of view of the rigor, fiscal compact agreement, and the agenda for growth. We have prepared somewhere late December, early January, a very small, let's call it paper that we have floated a bit around to the European institution, to some other member countries, and we have realized that in many of the other countries of Europe, and I would just mention in a sort of timing scale of our contact, the UK and the Netherlands, there were similar ideas around. So we've found a very close convergence towards a number of points. So the idea was there already to try to get something into the informal European Council of January, and subsequently into the spring one, which is going to be held in a couple of days. And that's the reason why we very much welcome the conclusive declaration of the January European Summit, where single market employment, and notably employment for young people, and action for small and medium-sized companies are focused and mentioned. We think that already those conclusions reflect very much what, in our view, should be a strategy. We have worked on that together with other partners, and the end result is indeed this letter, which thank you, Chairman, for reporting about positive reaction in this room today, which are again very much welcome. And we think that this letter has the very sense to contribute to the overall reflection at European level. It doesn't pretend in any way to be a sort of new reinvention of whatever, is not necessarily a fresh air, is not, it's nothing, let's say, particularly special. What we consider to be special is the fact that 12 member countries from completely different realities, the North, the South, the West, the East, countries which were already among the 15 countries which have entered the European Union after 2004, countries which are part of the euro, countries which are outside the euro, AAA economies, let's call it less than AAA economies, are joining together and signing together a letter which focuses about a number of actions which are, of course, already in the pipeline. We know they are into the Europe 2020 agenda, there are in the Commission programs, there are even under discussion already in the Council and the Parliament. What we would like to do, what we have the, let's say, the ambition to do through the letter, is to bolster that kind of action, to strengthen the motivation for that kind of action. We ask, and we have put in the letter, we have proposed in the letter, precise date. We do believe that having a date is quite important for Europe. Back to the Europe single market in 1992, those who were already engaged in European matters at that time remember how catalyzing was that date for Europe, for European countries, for European citizens, which knew that date, and also for, of course, for European business. So we think that dates are important, and we think that we need priorities. We need priorities. We need to give a certain number of priority. And by the way, last but not least, and there I'm coming again into the Italian perspective, in a way, our government is trying to bring forward a very parallel strategy at the domestic level. We have started back in late November and December with a first package of economic measures which was aimed to secure fiscal stability. There were structural reforms in it concerning notably the retirement system. There were tax measures to allow our country to reach the budget equilibrium in 2013, which is an undertaking already taken by the government which was there before our, and that we wanted to confirm, and to secure all the different fundamentals. And then we move with the second package on liberalization and the third one on administrative simplification, precisely towards steps that we consider very much interconnected with growth, with the fact to put the premise for the essential basic element for a relaunching of our national economy. So we see very much this kind of parallel strategy as a coherence for our government, in the sense I was saying at the very beginning. So what I will do now, briefly, of course, is just to go through some of what we consider to be key points in the letter, and to mention in parallel some of the action we are undertaking or we have undertook in Italy. So the first point that we consider important is the focus on the single market. And as David has already pointed out, a specific focus within the single market policy on the service sector. Why? I think we all have the answer in mind. The service sector is very, very important for Europe, for European Union economy, for European growth, and the service sector has still a huge margin of development. There is room for improving quite a lot in ensuring in the service sector the same kind of liberalization at European level we enjoy in the goods sector. So we think that the kind of growth Europe had in the 90s of last century, if we want to say like that, in an historic perspective, which was very much due to what it was done through the Single Act, through the White Book on the achievement of the single market for goods, is now possible in the service sector. And when we think at service sector enforcement, we think, of course, at a full implementation of the free movement of service principle, which is in the treaty, through the service directive, which has to be fully applied, and also through a variety of other directives which are in place or can be put in place or even modified. This is the reason why we look very much forward the European Commission to carry on a careful scrutiny, country by country, on how concretely the liberalization in some key service industries, like network industries, have been concretely carried on. Our impression is that this scrutiny is indispensable to understand if a genuine pan-European level playing field exists, or if elements like those just mentioned by David can be detected there or there. We think that the overall enforcement of single market rules can be improved. You know now, if you are a little familiar with the treaty system, that if we look, for example, to the so-called measure having an equivalent effect effect to a restrictive, to a quantitative restriction in intra-community trade, you have the Commission, in order to have a certain national rule withdrawn or amended or modified, whatever, has to pass through different steps. You have a letter of formal notice, then you have a time for answer from the member states, a certain dialogue between the Commission and the national authorities, then you have a reasoned opinion, subsequent an answer, time for the member states to comply to it, and finally, if there is no result, the Commission goes with an action to the Court of Justice. It is only in the Court of Justice that you have the final word, and then, of course, the country, if found wrong, has to comply with. Now, if you compare this kind of quite lengthy and I would say even costly procedure to the one existing, for example, for state aids, which concerns states, which concerns the Commission and the member countries, and which concerns also kind of possible obstacles to the level playing field in Europe, there the Commission, at the same time where in the previous one reaches the step of the reasoned opinion, the Commission reaches instead the step of a decision, and the decision is already binding and is already enforceable. So what we would like to see is this asymmetry reduced. Now, our reflection brings us to the following point. Of course, it is not time for the moment for a treaty change. It is maybe for a future reflection, a future action, and so on. But what it could be possible to have immediately is a sort of political, solemn engagement by the different countries to take as serious as possible already the reasoned opinion. And this is, by the way, in our modest view, also in coherence with the text of the relevant rule in the treaty. We can take such a solemn undertaking, such a solemn engagement among the different member states, unless, for example, no established law case exists, where, of course, to have the Court of Justice to pronounce itself is very important, or where a very particular strong national interest reason exists. But this will reduce very much a lot of possible query which are now still existing, and speed up much more the enforcement of the European single market rules. Is a proposal for reflection, is nothing more than that, but we are discussing it with at all different levels with our partners, and there is room for reflecting on it, and room, of course, for proposal for improving. Now, the idea is also to have, at this stage in time, again, a strict implementation and enforcement of state aid rules. We think that it is now very important, notably because we are focusing also on fiscal discipline in the different member countries, that the Commission plays fully its role of guardian for the treaty, and notably for competition, in particular in the field of state aid rules. So we would like to see state aid rules strictly applied as an element of a well-functioning single market. Now, what are we doing in Italy in respect to that? Let's say, first of all, quite in a very candid way, that we are aware that Italy is certainly not among the best performing countries as to the infringement to the single market rules. So we are working quite hard to reduce the number of procedures that we have now pending with the European Commission or in front of the European Court of Justice. So we look very much improving that kind of our country not exactly good situation. Then we have we have in some of our recently adopted or strengthened act improved the liberalization of a number of public service, notably on transport. Specific authority for transport sector has been set up, and there will be a lot of injection of new competition in the transport service in Italy. We have also changed a number of rules which were probably creating some problems for business in banking and insurance sector. We have measures concerning some regulated professions like pharmaceuticals, lawyer, public notaries, and so on. We have introduced tax incentives for infrastructure and construction service, and we have a number of measures improving the overall business environment. We think, this is second point, on digital Europe and digital economy. We, among the simplification, administrative simplification measures the government has proposed recently, there are a number of measures simplifying the dialogue between citizens and business and the public administration, precisely through digital tools. We have a third point. We think that an effective internal market for energy has to be established. We think that Europe, being as a whole the biggest energy consumer or among the very biggest energy consumers in the world, there is a need for a genuine, effective let's say, common policy in a way, using an old-fashioned language, for energy in Europe. We have in Italy liberalized the gas sector. We have adopted measures for liberalizing fuel distribution, and we are acting to strengthening the power on the authorities which are supervising local utilities. Fourth point, the European research area, which is mentioned in the letter. This is of great importance for us. We do believe that RDT is clearly an element of growth and also an element for creating a new jobs opportunity. We need a pan-European research community in order to allow Europe also to keep competitive advantage worldwide. We look at the external dimension of the single market. David has said already a lot about it. Let me add that we look very much from the Italian perspective, but we think it is also essential from the European perspective to the Mediterranean, notably having in mind what's happening in several Northern Africa and Middle East countries, a new political spring, a new economic spring, quite likely, and we think it is in European duty and responsibility to be very much open and careful to that. Reduction of excessive regulatory and administrative burden is an essential part. I won't add that much to what David has already said. We think that there should be an ex ante and an ex post careful impact assessment, and that's also what we are trying to do at home. We are considered to be an over-regulated country. We are indeed quite a regulated country, less regulated, believe me, since our government is there, and if we will have time, hoping on Parliament support, we will reduce even more that kind of burden which affects part of the business in Italy and at European level, including Italy. Thank you very much.